what makes it so unique. I will today talk about the third national art treasure, which is Jamini Roy. And as usual, I'll take you through the presentation in 4 segments. The first one, we explore the concept of what is National Art Treasures of India, when, why, and the mystery behind it. I'll take you through Jamini Roy's work in 3 sections. One is the life of the artist. How did he begin? What made him change, or what were the shifts that came in his career? How was he received? Because I think that is a thematic that I've been drawing up even in my earlier lectures, saying that how was the artist perceived while he was actually working? What made him who he is today? Because it has to be the then contemporary perception of the artist which kind of continued, or the legacy kind of continued ahead. So, first of all, national art treasures, or the Navaratnas, or NAT as they're called, is a concept that was framed in 1976, which was part of the 1972 Antiquities and Art Treasures Act, which was undertaken, no surprises there, by the Ministry of Culture, but through the Archaeological Survey of India, where they said that we need to identify, or they identified artists who were designated as national art treasures. Now this is the year 1976, and in the first, we now call it first, but the list consisted of 4 artists. So Rabindranath Tagore, who we've already spoken about, who was a poet and the painter; Jamini Roy, Amrita Shergill, and Nandalal Bose. Mind you, by 1976, all these artists had passed away. Then, Nandalal Bose was still alive at that time. In 1979, there was another list of 5 artists who were added into it. And then after 1979, there's nothing. So when I look at this list, I'm always wondering who identified the artists, and why was it done only twice? Why was it not done by the National Gallery of Modern Art, which was also under the Ministry of Culture? Because National Gallery of Modern Art was instituted in 1954. This list came out in 1976. In my head, I've come up with 2 names, possible names. Why these 2 names? Because 1976 was the time for, was not for a time for, but was when you had the emergency declared. And Indira Gandhi was at the helm of the nation. And she had 2 particular people who, were her advisors for all things related to her culture and heritage. One was Pupul Jaikar, who in the realm of craft, textiles, development of folk art, completely a doyen. Then there is Lakshmi Prasad Sihare, who was, of course, the director of NGMA, was also part of the Ministry of Culture, but none of their names feature in the research that I have done so far. So I'm always wondering why or how. The interesting part of the National Art Treasures means, because it is under the Antiquities Act, it means that these artworks cannot be exported out of the country. And even if if it is prior 1972 or before the acts were announced, that was fine. So this for me continues to be something that is very, very unique and a interesting case in point. So if any of you have any information, clues, please do comment or share at the end of the lecture. Now we come to the artist under discussion today, Jamini Roy. We're very familiar with his name. By the way, Yamini, it's the non-Bengali way of pronouncing the name is Yamini, but it is Jamini, and it means the same thing, which means moonlight. Just a little bit of tidbit. He's one of India's most celebrated modern artists. I'm going to hold on to that term and refer to it time and time again. He's known for, bold lines, folk inspired style, and who preferred to be called as a patua. This is a very interesting image of an artist. Of course, he's much, much, much senior here, but what is interesting is the art that he's surrounded with, the way he's seated on the floor, the angle of the canvas. Again, we will talk about these details as we progress. But let us begin as what would have been the starting point? Where did he come from? What drew him to to adapt a style like this? Some basic details. He was born in the year 1887 in a place called Torre, which is in West Bengal. It is a small town which was known for a vibrant tradition of various forms of art, be it terracotta, in terracotta, not only making of pots, but bricks with figurines on it, the Durga Puja presentations, the specific style of the pots, or the patuas, the scroll paintings which were there, coppersmiths would. He's mentioned that the place that he grew up in was rich with the traditional forms because it was far removed from Calcutta. And because of that, it was kind of isolated, and the traditional forms coexisted. And as a child, he had an opportunity to experience them, engage them, and in fact, that's kind of sparked his interest. And he was, you know, blessed or lucky enough to be in an ambience where his father encouraged or supported his dream to study art further. And that's how, in the year 1903, he joins the Government School of Art and Craft, which is in Calcutta. In that time, the art school education was driven largely by, what was being taught in England specifically. So, which was, the Greek style. You had studio practice like life model, learning from Greek statues, or what was considered as what we call today as, perspective, symmetry, pretty much academic way of painting, using canvases, oil paints, shading. He was exposed to all of that, and he was quite skilled in that particular form. But Jamini Roy was, while he was good at that, he also wasn't, because of the skill that he had, he came in touch with Abanindranath Tagore, what was happening in Calcutta. He was kind of a restless soul, I think, because while a student, he did a lot of odd jobs. There's references of him saying that I worked in a printing press, because Calcutta was a hotbed for printing of books, printing of art prints, lithographs, copper plates, and the whole range. So he worked as that. And he was kind of looking for something. Now, we'll come to that something later, but just to give you a sense of his style, the work right at the bottom is something that he did as a student. It's a phenomenal work in terms of the skill, the rendering, watercolor, handling of the medium. While what you see on the top is something that you come across in the art market quite often, is early works which are done in a very impressionistic style. And I particularly picked up this portrait of Mahatma Gandhi because, that is one of the shifts that, one of the ideologies that helped him shift to the quote that I've put here, which is, I want to create a truly Indian style of painting, one that springs from the soil of our country. This statement is not while he's studying. Please bear that in mind. While he's studying, he's just, he's a young boy, barely 16, 18 years of age, come from a small town, come into a big city, cultural shifts which are there, but still he kind of goes on and works within that realm and establishes a name for himself, where even, reputed artists, his teachers, all say that if you need a portrait done, the man to go to is Jamini Roy. So much so that when the Tagores, that is Abanindranath Tagore and Gaganendranath Tagore, Abanindranath Tagore taught him while he was in the art school, needed a portrait of their grand uncle done, which is Rabindranath Tagore's father's portrait, Debindranath Tagore's portrait done. They gave the commission to Jamini Roy in the year 1914, and that becomes something that kind of recognizes him, but also it brings him into the purview world view of Abanendranath Tagore. And that starts kind of a change which is there and which leads to things like that. Now, this imagery is superlatively, the iconic style of Jamini Roy. You have the NGMA has perhaps some of the best prints of, especially these three ladies, which are right in the blue. They're the lovely prints to have, and there's something that is calming and serene which is there. But for an artist who's trained in this to come to something like this, it's a huge shift, and it is not something that would have happened overnight. How does this journey take place is brings me to the second part of Jamini Roy's journey. Like I said, he grew up in a place that had a brilliant, thriving and alive tradition of various art forms. So what you see over here is, the Bankura, terracotta animals, the horse, which is a symbol of the cottage industry, or the elephant, or the little figure that you see. What is common in here is that it's very simple tubular forms. Now, you may say, oh, that's done on a wheel, that's done by a potter. Look at something at the bottom, which is, the temples in West Bengal have these terracotta tiles with these figurines which have narrative scenes of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are done over here. Again, exposure to that. And that is the scroll paintings, the parts or the pots, as if I'm getting the pronunciation right, in West Bengal, which are narrative, scrolls, where the patua would be going from one village to another. You know, it was performative art. It was not something that you hung in your home, but the artist came, unscrolled it, narrated the story. It was something that lasted over days. And these were the influences that he had, cut short to him coming to the art school, cut short to him being in Calcutta doing commissions. By the time he is, 34, I'll kind of take you through the process that he went through that is documented. He he realizes that this is not what he wants to do. Some of the things, and it's not like 34, like, grand shift. These are simmerings for at least from the 20s. He starts to kind of question himself, talking, to his colleagues and to his friends about these thoughts. And one of the first things, there are three kind of instances that I've kind of put together for you all. First is when he did the portrait for the Tagores, his contact with Abanindranath Tagore, E.B. Havel, who were the strongest proponents of saying that art or artists in India should look at revival of miniatures, revival of Indian subjects, give up oil painting, paint in watercolors. While that was happening, while he was visiting, uh, while he was, while he was visiting Jarshranko, he is in contact with Sunaini Devi, who is an artist painting in a completely different style of work. And he has gone on record and said that he was influenced by the work that he saw of Sunaini Devi, which was very simple and it came naturally to her. The third point of it, for him to start thinking in this direction was Mahatma Gandhi's call for Swadeshi and saying, give up all things that are not Indian, things that are uh, of our country, and that was something that struck a deep chord, with him, and saying that what is it that I'm doing, what is it that I can do. And he realized that if I have to connect to the people, if I have to show my tradition, turning to miniatures, turning to subjects which are philosophical is not going to work. That's one thought. And then there was another thing that kind of helped him. Sorry, there are four things. And the last thing that I'm going to point out over here, that Sri Chaitanya had a great following in West Bengal, and he was also a Vaishnava, and he would read his books. And it was his life practice to read something, uh, and then kind of reflect and go to sleep. And there was one incident kind of that struck a chord and kind of brought the whole thing together, which is, he says that while I was reading uh, about Sri Chaitanya, there was one passage that came to my mind, and realization happened. There was a poet who was a great devotee of the saint. He had written a poem on the saint, and he wanted to present it to him. But Chaitanya, every time that he would hear Krishna's name, would go into raptures, and he would pass away, because that was the kind of uh, involvement he had. So his disciples would always kind of check who's meeting him, what is it that's happening. The moment Sri Chaitanya's disciple heard the poem, he got very angry. Why? Because the poet had compared Jagannath, the great Lord Jagannath, to Sri Chaitanya. And he said, "You don't understand Sri Chaitanya's things, or what the philosophy is all about," which was that you cannot compare a mortal human to the divine. And the first principle of aesthetics, or any understanding that you should have, is that the divine creation cannot be equated, or the powers of the divine cannot be equated to man. It may be a little long winding, but the point over here is that there has to be a distinction between the power or the divine creation of God and what man creates. And hence it has to be simple. And that helped Jamini Roy cut cords with art that was based on the principles of, mimetic, or making it look real, using light and shade, using perspective, and doing something which is on the left, which is flat. Now, there's a reason why I have put both these pictures together. The painting of the woman bending over is his the first experiment that he had when we gave up academic portrait style oil painting, which was to do with the Bengal revivalism. Even here, he felt that he was still trying to, mimic the human form, and he was competing with God's creation. And this is not what he wanted to do, because it was not something that was striking a chord. He gives this style up, and he arrives at this. And this is a long process. It's always easy to say, I wish I could paint like a child. Picasso is the first, is a famous artist who's saying when to paint like a child is something that's the highest form of creation. But to actually give up your skill that you've learned and to do something like this is difficult. But he arrives at this style through introspection, through all these multiple influences. Again, I'm going to repeat them once, which is when he encountered the art of Sunayani Devi, which was a simple, bold lines, when he understood Gandhiji's call for Swadeshi, when he understood the message, the intellectual shift that happened when he read this passage in Sri Chaitanya's life, that you cannot compete with the divine creation through your art. And he turned back to his roots, which he came from, which is looking at the scroll paintings, looking at the Bankura, looking at all things simple. But that was like a long process of 10 years, and that's how he arrives at it. But mind you, it's not an easy thing to do. At one hand, you have established a name, you have a following who appreciate a particular style. Suddenly give that up. You don't do what the Tagores are doing. You don't do what Abanindranath Tagore or his followers are doing. You say that you have a different vision and you want to stand outside the accepted thought leaders. He had no commissions coming in, he had no exhibitions, yet he did not give up his path and he continued to work. So, who were his supporters? Not in the art community initially. Okay, when he showed his works for the first time in Calcutta in 1929, Mukul Dev who was the then principal of the Government College of Arts and Craft, supported him. But it was a Britisher, Alfred Watson, who came and inaugurated the show, spoke highly about the exhibition in a press, in a press interview, which had people looking at his work differently and seeing what it is. And as it happens, every time that you have some form of appreciation and something new comes along, there is always some criticism. And what was that one form that was very popular in Calcutta, at that time? Not by then, even the Kalighat Putts had kind of stopped. Was it Kalighat Putt? What is Kalighat Putt? These are traditional scroll painters who had migrated to Calcutta in search of work, who had made the steps of the Kali Badi or the Kali temple in Calcutta a place where they made quick copies, quick paintings of the goddesses of different scenes, like this cat with the scorpion or Shiva Parvati, and used to sell it to the tourist. They said, "Oh, it looks like folk. It looks very simple. There is no innovation here. If he's just looking at the folk painting and making works like that, what is so new about it?" But and that his works were repetitive. But Jamini Roy was a firm believer that his art was nothing to do with the Kalighat parts. Yes, he owed a lot to the Patuas, but not to the Kalighat parts, because he said that the moment they came into the city, they adapted their skill and craft to the city. They gave up what was original in them, and they started making commercial works for it. So his art was not that, and a few people did understand that. And most of them, interestingly, amongst the first group of people who supported him were Europeans. There was Stella Kramrisch, who wrote about his works and praised him highly. She introduced him to a lot of people who were in Calcutta at that time. In 1939, within 10 years, he had, was it 1930? I'm mixing up the date, but there was an exhibition that happened in London. There was another exhibition that happened in 1943 in Burlington Gallery, then in Burlington House. He showed in Paris. Sorry, uh, I'll come to that slide later. And then there was no stopping in how he was perceived and how people accepted him, and work started selling and people started coming to his home. Now, just to kind of go back to this claim, which over here, that his works were repetitive, just to highlight that point, here are three distinct ways that he paints in the subject matters that he dealt with. Just to give you a clue, most of you would be familiar with his mother and child, the women in blue. But he also had the whole Christianity series that he did, the Christ series, and he dealt with subjects like nativity, flight to Egypt, Last Supper, crucifixion, the entire range of subjects for Christianity. He did things like, apart from color and bright colors, he did these monochromatic works of the ball singers, Chantal people. Mother and child was a subject that was very popular with him, with the people, and how he dealt with it. And in each work, there is something that comes in unique. I'm not denying that he didn't do multiples of that. There's no way I can say that, because you will see so many of these images in different forms across time. But do you know why that happened? Just a little digression from that. Why do you see so many of Jamini Roy's painting of the same subject matter? Because he was of the firm belief that if I'm making art which draws inspiration from the roots of my country, of my region, and I'm referring to my village where I had access to the pots, to the terracotta, makers of idols, of woodwork, painting, it was accessible, and art has to be accessible, and I'm not going to make it elitist. And hence he says, don't even call me an artist, I'm a patwa. He had a studio where he was open about the fact that he had a lot of people sitting working for him, but he said, they're under my direction, I control everything. Because he had a great sense of composition, of how do you handle colors, what the line should be. And he would control everything, finish everything, because of his desire to make art democratic, to make it accessible to a larger number of people, and to, you know, uh, very democratic way of thinking at that point, to break the distinction between this thing of a fine artist or a master artist, between a so-called crafts person or an artisan, and to say that call me a patwa. There's another interesting tidbit of information. The first time that he exhibited his all his only the new style work that you see over here, he included three works of the patwas who were there, and he's called them out, saying these are my works, these are the works by the traditional patwa, or the patwakars, or the chitrakars. And he said these are also done, here we kind of coexist together. And he kind of he also used to always exhibit his works in his home. So whenever people came to his home, they would see his paintings and those of the patuas, and he had a great collections of the original pots. And for those of you who might be familiar, Guru Sade Dutt, who had a fantastic collection of the traditional art forms of Calcutta, Jamini Roy gave some of his old parts to him to be part of that collection. So when Jamini Roy began this journey of finding that language, finding the new idiom, it was not based on the Kalighat parts. It was based on the patuas that he had seen in his village. He went traveling to all the villages where they were still practicing. He collected them, he studied them, he brought them to his studio, he understood what they were doing and imbibed the entire aspect of this. And he kind of went ahead. Again, this is to highlight the point, the diversity that he had. He also did animals, he was great with his the pencil sketches that he did. This is a little bit about the reviews that he got across the globe. So this is Art in England, India's greatest living painter, or what you have in the French magazine. And an interesting thing, which is that the UNICEF commissioned him to make, cards which were available in full color and distributed across the globe. And interestingly, Peggy Guggenheim, who was one of the most important collector for Picasso, Matisse, European art in America, is said to have believed Jamini Roy's studio and purchased his work also. So you have, the classic case which we do experience it till date, where Jamini Roy's, full gamut of, or the strength of his appreciation first happened in the most emphatic manner outside the country, and then it kind of came in within the country. Not to say that people didn't understand him, because the other person who kind of wrote very well and made his art accessible to a larger group of people is Dr. Shahid Suhrawadi. and there was Bishnu De and John Irving who wrote on him. There was another person, Datta, I'm, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, who wrote on him. While he was alive, this documentation happened. In fact, even the films division of India made a film on him. It's available on YouTube. Please go and check it. It's a 20-minute film. It's quite well made and gives you a great idea. And if you can see from, I think that was also the space where I got these clippings, which were not available anywhere else. So I've, you know, happily resorted to getting images from there. So, in a nutshell, how would you define, Jamini Roy's style? You say flat colors, bold outlines, minimal detail. Sounds very simple, but now you have hopefully understood the multiple sources that helped Jamini Roy arrive at this style, which was one, an intellectual thing based on the nationalist call of Mahatma Gandhi, a spiritual calling or a spiritual, kind of intellectual understanding of why art should not be mimetic and should be simple. The place where he grew up, his awareness of Sunaini Devi's style, kind of all came together for him to do something that was so easy for me to put in three words describing it as flat colors, bold line, minimal detail. But it also tends to, this simplicity tends to be, kind of overlooked by saying, oh, it's repetition, it's symmetry, but it's repetition, symmetry that is used effectively. There's also another aspect of it which I've kind of not highlighted upon, but it's something that is, if you read about it, you'll see that he was inspired by Byzantine and Egyptian icons. I think that influence is more in terms of, the aspect of symmetry, color, and how do you deal with repetition that comes in. It would have helped him to, you know, overcome these hurdles or challenges. I now come to the most interesting part of, most interesting for me, I mean, everything has been interesting so far, is that while we strongly associate Jamini Roy with paintings, flat, colors, he never stopped experimenting. He has painted on a pot or pots, like a terracotta vase kind of thing. He has done work in clay. And something that fascinated me when I saw it for the first time was these wood sculptures. And unfortunately, there's not much available, but they suddenly change the way you deal with him, the way you would kind of locate him within the trajectory of his work. If somebody saw these works, it would be hard for them to imagine that this is an artist who would also do works that look decorative and pretty, but at the same time, here you go. These are bold, expressionistic, you may say minimal, but they're full of energy, and there's so much that comes through something like this. And these are just a few examples that I'm showing you. There are many more. I urge you to visit NGMA and see them, because that's one of the best places where you can see these. And again, I could say that, inspired by, the folk art. But the most important thing here is look at the way he has treated the material which is in hand. If it is an unevenly formed, log of wood, he doesn't disturb the original form, but he works around it, he works with it, and the form emerges out of that. Again, to have the diversity of, you know, going with the flow and wanting to control when it came to his painting is something that, the mind boggles. I've come to the last. I'm going to stop now, because if there are questions, I hope there are questions, or we can, do parallel discussions along with it. I think the greatest acknowledgement that came to Jamini Roy was when Rabindranath Tagore, wrote a letter to him talking about general things of, what he thinks of what he thinks art is or what poetry is. And in one of his interviews, or when, it is documented that if there was one person that he felt most aligned with, or he felt he was his kindred spirit, was Jamini Roy. And why is this statement important? Because Rabindranath Tagore was surrounded by a family of artists. He had enough students, artists around him, a well traveled man. But the person that he most had, a strong, creative, artistic, or a, a philosophical kind of outlook bond with was with Jamini Roy. For those of you who were part of the last lecture, for Rabindranath Tagore, again, the process or his journey began when he was late in his life. He he believed that, uh, to represent yourself as an artist from a particular region, you didn't necessarily have to go back into the tradition. He wasn't a great follower or believer of the Bengal revivalist school after a point. He said art had to be reflective of the people, of the place that you were in, and it had to be something that could cut boundaries of language and people could understand. And if he felt that Jamini Roy, with something that people, criticism that was there, said that it's repetitive folk and how is it new, I think that was the greatest support that came in saying that, you know, if one genius mind can understand this and feels Jamini Roy holds that key, I think that's why I got this picture, because it kind of ties the whole thing of Jamini Roy's journey of an artist from academic to Bengal revivalism to coming on his own, going against the odds of his peer group, sticking his ground and creating something that was so unique, acknowledging the artist from where he gets his inspiration, including them in the part of his process, saying that I will be making more so that art is accessible and available to a larger audience and not be a part of the elitist agenda. I think that is something, and of course, the diversity of work that he did with paintings and his sculptures, and he continuously evolved. The last slide will show that. This is him when he was in his, in the last decade or last couple of years of his life, where he started painting on using large dabs of paint. Some of you could say, oh, it's age related, but whatever it is, he adapts, he evolves, and he creates a language that resonates with his philosophy, and he's ever changing and ever evolving. I think that, for me, sums up in a nutshell what Jamini Roy stands for and why he is considered, and he should be considered undoubtedly, somebody who brings in a new language for art practice using the modern idiom in India. So, the father of modern art, though there are many people who did that. So, I would say he's definitely one of them who made it, you know, uh, in a very definitive and a strong manner. So, this was my presentation in the time that we had about of 40 minutes to 45 minutes. Happy to hear any comments, questions, suggestions, or Darshan and I can have a conversation. So that's also quite open.
That was great, to going through Jamni Roy. I had one curious question. So, if
Yeah.
somebody wants to acquire a Jamni Roy today, what does it take? How does one look at it? And
So
the second,
buying within the country is fine because it's not an antiquity. It's only a national art treasure. All that it means is that it cannot be exported.
okay. So, I mean, we keep hearing that a lot of Jamni Roys exist. So, how do you
Yes.
one? Because he also believed as a Patua, and people worked along with him.
Mm,
So, and of course, we had a retrospective here at NGMA, I think,
mm,
about 7 years ago, which was curated by Ella Datta. I was part of it, and
mm,
I
mm,
looked at most of the works. We had also got some collections where he had a lot of impressionist,
mm,
experimentation, what he had done
mm, mm,
with his painting. So I also saw there is slight variations to his stylistic when sometimes in some paintings it is
mm,
not very consistent. I feel it is because the other people worked along with him.
mm.
So if one has to buy a Jamini Roy, what is the eye one should look at it?
Always a trick question, Darshan. How do you? I mean, and this applies not only for Jamini Roy, but I think for every artist that you would buy, especially a modern artist and an artist who's not alive. One is you look for provenance. It's it's a foolproof thing, right? I'm not going to get into connoisseurship because that is that takes a lot of time, and that is open for subjective kind of discussions. When I say provenance, I mean, Darshan, you know no stranger to that. Provenance is something that is, basically from the point that the artist made the work till the point that it reached the current owner. If there is a record of that, saying that, this was acquired or gifted by Jamini Roy to an XYZ person who had it in his family. Then, as the son, they got it and now they're selling it. I think that is one way of looking at it. Uh, and the other thing is, like, if it is a published work, but again, with Jamini Roy being, because there are so many of the same style, I wouldn't just say blindly trust on that published work, but your best bet is to you know, do a thorough provenance check. Uh, we are yet to come to a point to have, I'm not familiar if we have them, but testing of paper, testing of material, because Jamini Roy, I kind of missed on that part that I wanted to talk about. He painted in a particular manner. He used natural pigments, the kind of paper that was available at that particular point in time, age of that paper, that can kind of help you gauge the age of the work at least, and puts you into a safe zone. But I wouldn't say even the, you could do signature analysis also, compare signatures. uh, but there were times when he also went into making of the stamps, and stamps were put on it. And again, this is part of his accepted practice, and because he wanted to make it more accessible. So while it worked well for that particular moment, for what he was trying to do at that point, I think as the market requirements are and what is going on in the market, it becomes that much more challenging.
So the other thing what I wanted to ask is, Last Supper has been one of the very, well-known theme. Any artist we see today, Madhvi Parikh also has worked on Last Supper.
Mm,
We see Vivek Vilasani, who has also worked on Last Supper. We see a lot of artists even today, the contemporary artists are with the Last Supper. And how do we look at Jamni Roy doing a Last Supper? I mean, he has
mm,
one painting of Last Supper, one Christ, as you know, it is there in the collections.
correct, correct. So again, why is this fascination with the Last Supper? This is again a very personal reading of that. One, because we have two. You've raised two interesting. You've given two new artists. One, a self-taught or kind of not an art education, art school artist, that is Madhvi Parekh, and then you have Vivek Vilasani, who's kind of exposed to the Western thought, exposed to the whole art historical context of it. The challenge of the composition, you know, that whole thing of a long table with 13 people, one in the center. How do you do that? How do you make that space interesting? How do you break it up, and how do you use that, using your vision as an artist compositionally, um, to make something different, and the messaging possibilities that it has. That's what Vivek Vilasani does, right? He uses the whole thing of the Kathakali dancers, or he uses these tropes to use the familiarity of the subject, or what we believe is the familiarity of the subject, and take the conversation in a completely different manner. Like you say, hey, what's happening? I think I know what it is, but what is happening? With Madhvi Parekh, it comes as a challenge. And she once said that it is so, she said, I was so tempted, so many people, and there is so much that I can do, that excitement of that space and people. And, she says, ये तो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा ऐसा. That's where she came from, that she took it as a challenge, that how can I do something like this? I wish I could give a better and take on this for Jamini. But one of the things that I have consistently seen, or one is, of course, the demand. He had a lot of non-Europeans, non-Indians who were interested in his work and acquiring his work, and they would have asked him to paint, because one of his earlier commissions was K.C. Das had, very famous, commissioned him to do the series of Ramayana, and he had done that and done it very effectively. And he took it up as a challenge, saying that it's one thing to do, the subjects that I'm familiar with in the style that I'm familiar with, and make it work visually. Will I be able to do the same if I take a subject which I'm not familiar with, and I can translate that into something which is so, so part of my DNA, my Indianness, for a lack of better word. I don't think he would have used it that way, but there's a different wording that he used. But basically, to see if his visual language and his thought process as an artist applies to a subject that is alien to him and yet work. And that's how he takes it up, and he does so many things and it works successfully. It's not like it doesn't look odd. And that's how it worked, and that's how he continued to do those subjects, and you know and evolve with them as he went. I don't know if I've answered your question, Darshan.
Yes. So that reminded me of the Ellora, where you have a mural panel of Ravana shaking Kailas, and then you
Yeah.
have Reddappa Naidu's Ravana shaking Kailas. I mean, it is so much, the after so much of years, how an artist perceives, that creative space, how he utilizes. I think that was very apt, and the curiosity to experiment, like Manu Parikh also has done with the Last Supper. We see a lot of artists do that.
Mm,
I think the last question from my end would be, how do we look at folk in contemporary times? It is just a message for the young artists, what I feel.
mm,
Is it
mm.
important? Is it a window to look at and to also have the relevance in current times in their artistic practices?
Darshan, I think we should have another talk on that, but to answer it very shortly, if I can do that. First of all, I have a problem because in the year 2025, or from 2000 onwards at least, uh, I don't think we can even segregate, folk, tribal, whatever, because everybody has access to the same kind of technology that we have, same kind of education that everybody has, right? So, what is it that we call folk, and what is it that we call tribal, or any other practice? What defines it? I think we need to get that clear. If you're referring to something that is like in case of Jamini Roy, that being one case in point, or what Madhvi Parekh does, do you call them folk or do you not call them folk? What is it? Or if you look at, again, I don't know if people are familiar, Jangad Singh Sham's daughter Japani, or Manisha Jha, who's in Delhi. They come from the tradition, or their legacy is that they're educated and they choose to use that idiom to make works of art. They're contemporary. Their their narratives are contemporary. Their issues are contemporary, but they choose a style which is not. It's like do you question why somebody is using photography or why somebody is making something in marble? You
No.
don't, right? Because you went to an art school, you got it. So they were born in that family, they have it, and they do it. But they have the same questions. Their sensibility is there. It's a great work of art. You recognize it, but it's a difficult thing. Uh, my problem is only when it kind of underplays one or the other. I think it should be all looked at in a meaningful is such a vacant word, in a way that makes sense for the practitioner, and be aware of it. But I think there's a second part to your question, which was, should young artists look at it? I think everybody who comes into the realm of art, and especially in art practice, and if they've enrolled in an art school, it should be mandatory. What is your heritage, be it art history or be it any other forms of art practice? Because so many times I come across students who have no clue. And it's not for I to an extent, yes, they say, oh, we were not taught in our art school. Across the country, they blatantly say that. I said, okay, if you're not taught, that's fine. But when you say I'm an artist practicing in India, you have so many mediums of access and knowledge and information. Look it up. I think that curiosity needs to come in. For instance, I can always see those leather things that are hanging behind you. How many would have that curiosity to say, what is that? Let me explore it. Or if there is a particular medium that you want to do, how is that material treated in my country? If you're working in wood, what are the various forms of expression of wood which have been done in the country in various ways? I'm not saying revive, or I'm not saying adapt, or do it in that way only. All I'm saying is that if you come from a place of knowing that this is the heritage that I have, it may not be a question that comes into your practice. Again, I'm very cautious when I say this. I'm not saying that make art which is Bengal revivalist style or go back to those things. All I'm saying is that don't ignore it completely, know what it is, and then choose to do what you have to do. That's it.
True. I think that was a great. We had a great session today, and also I'm glad we talked about current times and also having that
Yeah.
contrast of how Jamini Roy from that time to now. How does it really? I
Yeah.
think the essence of that. The folk, that element of the material, the essence is very well captured by Jamini Roy, which is still so much, which draws everybody attention to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still fresh. Everybody wants it aesthetically. It's so good,
True.
and also it has so much of relevance from the independence and post-independence times, which becomes so important for our artistry. So, with that, what is the next artist you would be exploring for us?
The next one, I think I've already said, but I'm kind of going blank right now. But it will
Okay,
be one of the, we'll be doing, sorry, Abanindranath Tagore.
Abanindranath Tagore. I think
Yeah,
that will
yeah,
be a great session coming
yes.
from our
I think
collection
there are
also.
two people who put in a chat, because I can see something saying that studio chat, two people, or that's us chatting.
I think we are chatting. We didn't
Okay,
have
okay.
any. Uh, There is a question in Instagram. So,
Huh.
uh, is Jamini Roy art currently displayed in galleries abroad, or has it been showcased as part of temporary exhibition? And the
Is it?
other is, could you? It is from Instagram. Is this
Huh.
Priyanka uh, Khaldipur who has a question? And also, there's one more. Could you briefly acknowledge Jamini Roy's unique style and possibly compare it with the Western artist we see today? I mean, she wants a contrast
So
of
the,
a Western
uh,
artist.
the first question, is it displayed internationally? So
Yeah,
all the people who bought it while he was alive, it is there internationally. So the Victoria and Albert Museum has it. I think the Cleveland Museum has. These are two immediately that came to my mind. I'm sure there are others also who have it, but I can't comment immediately saying that it's there, but at least these two have it. Uh, was it displayed earlier? Like I said, he has had exhibitions, at least two that I know of in London, one in Paris. I'm not sure what happened there was one exhibition in New York also that happened, and all this while he was alive. So of course people would have his paintings there, and some have donated it to, I think, Chicago Museum of Art also has something, but uh, you know you need to do a little bit more study on that. But his works are available internationally. Now the second part of the question: can you compare it to the artist of West?
West,
West, right?
yeah, Western artist we see today. I mean,
We see
possible,
today.
possibly compare it with Western artist we see today.
That's such a broad-based question. I think it needs to be. Is there
I
any artist
mean,
that she has in mind particularly?
mhm, mm, I think that's the only question. So she left it in the comment.
Mm, I don't know. It's difficult
I
to
think,
answer because
but
one,
I
it's
think
modern
when
art.
modern art,
So
but
I.
definitely it's a mostly any artist would pick it up from. I mean the style of like this, you know. I mean there are contrasts to other countries, I believe, where artists are going to looking into the folk and they are traditional or some of the cultural aspects of it and get inspired and start working. But I'm not able
Hmm.
to recall anything, any artist as such.
Hmm. I'm also
So
trying to
I,
think.
yeah.
I can't think of anybody who's done. No, it doesn't come to my mind.
So with that, let's end this session. So on behalf of National Gallery of Modern Art, Bengaluru, Darshan Kumar, the host today, I thank one and all for joining us, and our deep gratitude and thank you for Yamini ma'am for having this enriched talk. Thank you, ma'am. So we'll catch up
Thank you so
the
much.
next time. We'll
Yes,
announce the
most
date and
certainly.
invitation.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Ah.